In the quiet suburbs of a small Midwestern town, where perfectly trimmed lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, a little 6-year-old girl named Lily sat alone on the steps of Happy Hearts Orphanage. Her small fingers clutched a worn teddy bear, the only reminder of her life before everything changed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete steps as she watched other children playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. 3 months had passed since that rainy Thursday evening when her world turned upside down. The memory played in her mind like a broken record, her mother's tears, her father's silence, and the gentle squeeze of her mother's hand before they drove away, promising to return soon. They never did. Mrs. Chen, the kind-hearted caretaker at Happy Hearts, had taken special notice of Lily from the moment she arrived. Unlike the other children who would cry out or throw tantrums, Lily remained eerily quiet, speaking only when spoken to, her big brown eyes carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. Every morning, she would sit on those same steps, clutching her teddy bear, waiting. Maybe they got lost, she would whisper to her teddy bear, whom she called Mr. Buttons. They'll find their way back soon. The other children at the orphanage tried to include her in their games, but Lily preferred to watch from a distance. During art therapy sessions, while other children drew colorful pictures of flowers and rainbows, Lily would always draw the same thing, a small blue house with 4 people standing outside, her mother, her father, herself, and her older brother Kai, who had disappeared 2 years before her parents left. What the other children didn't know, what even Mrs. Chen couldn't have guessed, was that Lily held a secret. The night before her parents left, she had overheard a conversation that would have made little sense to most 6-year-olds. But Lily was different. She remembered every word, every whispered fear, every mention of them and they, who were supposedly watching. As autumn turned to winter, Lily's routine remained unchanged. She would sit on the steps, watching and waiting, even as snowflakes began to dust her dark hair. Mrs. Chen would bring her hot chocolate, trying to coax her inside with stories and promises of warm cookies, but Lily's determination never wavered. One particularly cold December morning, as Lily sat in her usual spot, she noticed something unusual. A black car had been parked across the street for hours, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. She clutched Mr. Buttons tighter, remembering how her parents used to warn her about strange cars and unknown people. That same evening, while the other children were getting ready for bed, Lily found a small piece of paper tucked into Mr. Buttons' worn stuffing, a paper she was certain hadn't been there before. On it, in familiar handwriting, were 3 words that made her heart skip: "We're still watching." The discovery sent her mind racing back to all the strange occurrences of the past few months, the mysterious phone calls to the orphanage where no one spoke, the occasional glimpse of someone familiar in the crowd during their supervised park visits, and the way Mrs. Chen would sometimes stare out the window with a worried expression. As she lay in her small bed that night, surrounded by the gentle breathing of other sleeping children, Lily realized that perhaps her parents' disappearance wasn't as simple as everyone believed. Perhaps there was more to the story of her brother Kai's disappearance as well. The thought both frightened and excited her. Could it mean they hadn't abandoned her after all? Unknown to Lily, her presence at Happy Hearts Orphanage had set in motion a chain of events that would soon unravel the carefully constructed facade of her family's disappearance. As she drifted off to sleep, clutching Mr. Buttons and the mysterious note, she couldn't have known that across town, in a dimly lit room, people were working tirelessly to protect her from a truth that was far more complex and dangerous than any 6-year-old should have to face. The next morning would bring new visitors to Happy Hearts, a development that would mark the beginning of a story far more intricate than anyone could have imagined. But for now, Lily slept, her dreams filled with memories of a blue house, a complete family, and the hope that somewhere, somehow, they were all still watching over her. The morning brought a flurry of activity to Happy Hearts Orphanage. 2 people in crisp business attire arrived just as the children were finishing breakfast. Lily watched from her usual spot as they spoke with Mrs. Chen in hushed tones, their expressions serious. The woman had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, while the man carried a briefcase that seemed too heavy for its size. "Lily, sweetheart," Mrs. Chen called, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that Lily had never heard before. "These people would like to talk to you." In the small office that smelled of cinnamon and old books, Lily sat across from the visitors, Mr. Buttons settled firmly in her lap. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Rivera from Child Services, while the man, Mr. Hong, described himself as a special investigator. "We're here because we found something interesting," Dr. Rivera began, her voice gentle. "Something about your brother, Kai." Lily's fingers tightened around Mr. Buttons. Nobody had mentioned Kai's name since she arrived at the orphanage. The adults had always changed the subject whenever she brought him up, as if his very existence was a secret too heavy to acknowledge. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Hong continued, pulling out a photograph. This was taken at a school in the next state. Lily's heart nearly stopped. The boy in the photo was older, taller, but she would recognize that smile anywhere. It was Kai, standing in front of a school building, wearing a backpack that looked too new, too clean. "That's him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But Mom and Dad said he went away to live with Aunt June." Dr. Rivera and Mr. Hong exchanged glances. "Lily," Dr. Rivera said carefully, "we don't have any record of an Aunt June in your family." The room seemed to spin around Lily. She remembered the day Kai disappeared, how her parents had packed his bags while he was at school, how they'd told her he was going to live with their aunt because of his special talents, how they'd made her promise never to mention him again. "There's more," Mr. Hong said, pulling out another photograph. This one showed a familiar blue house, their old home, but something was different. In the window of Kai's old room, a light was on, and a shadow moved behind the curtains. "This was taken yesterday," he explained. Lily's mind raced back to the note she'd found in Mr. Buttons. "We're still watching." Could it be connected? She wanted to tell them about the note, but something held her back, the same instinct that had kept her quiet about the strange conversations she'd overheard between her parents. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Rivera leaned forward. "Lily, if there's anything you want to tell us, anything at all, we're here to help." But before Lily could respond, Mrs. Chen burst into the office, her face pale. "There's someone here," she said breathlessly. "They say they're from the school board, but something's not right." The morning brought a flurry of activity to Happy Hearts Orphanage. 2 people in crisp business attire arrived just as the children were finishing breakfast. Lily watched from her usual spot as they spoke with Mrs. Chen in hushed tones, their expressions serious. The woman had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, while the man carried a briefcase that seemed too heavy for its size. "Lily, sweetheart," Mrs. Chen called, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that Lily had never heard before. "These people would like to talk to you." In the small office that smelled of cinnamon and old books, Lily sat across from the visitors, Mr. Buttons settled firmly in her lap. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Rivera from Child Services, while the man, Mr. Hong, described himself as a special investigator. "We're here because we found something interesting," Dr. Rivera began, her voice gentle. "Something about your brother, Kai." Lily's fingers tightened around Mr. Buttons. Nobody had mentioned Kai's name since she arrived at the orphanage. The adults had always changed the subject whenever she brought him up, as if his very existence was a secret too heavy to acknowledge. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Hong continued, pulling out a photograph. This was taken at a school in the next state. Lily's heart nearly stopped. The boy in the photo was older, taller, but she would recognize that smile anywhere. It was Kai, standing in front of a school building, wearing a backpack that looked too new, too clean. "That's him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But Mom and Dad said he went away to live with Aunt June." Dr. Rivera and Mr. Hong exchanged glances. "Lily," Dr. Rivera said carefully, "we don't have any record of an Aunt June in your family." The room seemed to spin around Lily. She remembered the day Kai disappeared, how her parents had packed his bags while he was at school, how they'd told her he was going to live with their aunt because of his special talents, how they'd made her promise never to mention him again. "There's more," Mr. Hong said, pulling out another photograph. This one showed a familiar blue house, their old home, but something was different. In the window of Kai's old room, a light was on, and a shadow moved behind the curtains. "This was taken yesterday," he explained. Lily's mind raced back to the note she'd found in Mr. Button's. "We're still watching. Could it be connected?" She wanted to tell the Mr. Hong was on his feet about the note, but something held her back, the same instinct that had kept her quiet about the strange conversations she'd overheard between her parents. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Rivera leaned forward. "Lily, if there's anything you want to tell us, anything at all, we're here to help." But before Lily could respond, Mrs. Chen burst into the office, her face pale. "There's someone here," she said breathlessly. "They say they're from the school board, but something's not right." Mr. Hong was on his feet instantly, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "Get her out of here," he commanded, all pretense of being a simple investigator gone. Dr. Rivera grabbed Lily's hand, leading her quickly through the back door of the office. As they hurried down the hallway, Lily caught glimpses of men in dark suits entering the building. Through the windows, she saw more black cars like the one she'd noticed yesterday, surrounding the orphanage. Dr. Rivera led her to a small supply closet. "Stay here," she whispered, pressing something into Lily's hand. "Don't make a sound until you hear someone say, 'rainbow butterflies.' It's very important." Lily looked down at what Dr. Rivera had given her, a small flip phone, ancient compared to the smartphones she was used to seeing. On its screen was a single message: "When it rings, answer. Kay is waiting." In the darkness of the closet, Lily held Mr. Buttons close, her mind whirling with questions. The sound of footsteps and stern voices echoed through the walls. She heard Mrs. Chen's voice, stronger than she'd ever heard it before, saying something about paperwork and proper procedures. Minutes felt like hours in the small space. Lily thought about Kai, about the light in his old room, about all the strange things that had happened before her parents disappeared. Pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still unclear. The phone in her hand suddenly vibrated, not a ring, but a message appearing on the screen: "The truth about your family is bigger than you know. Stay hidden. Stay safe. We're coming. Kay." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she realized that Kai was alive, that he was trying to reach her. But why all the secrecy? Why had their parents sent them away separately? And who were the people in suits who seemed to be looking for her? As these questions swirled in her mind, Lily heard something that made her blood freeze: footsteps, stopping right outside the closet door. The handle began to turn, and she held her breath, clutching both Mr. Buttons and the old flip phone to her chest. The door opened, and light flooded the small space. Lily looked up, expecting to see Dr. Rivera or perhaps one of the stern-faced men in suits. Instead, she saw a face she had only seen in her dreams for the past 2 years, a face that was older, more serious, but unmistakably familiar. "Rainbow butterflies," the figure whispered, reaching out a hand. "It's time to go home, little sister." For a moment, time stood still in the tiny supply closet. Lily stared at her brother Kai, now 14 years old, his familiar smile mixed with an urgency she'd never seen before. He wore a dark hoodie and carried a backpack similar to the one in the photograph. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, still clutching Mr. Buttons and the flip phone. "We have to move quickly," Kai whispered, gently pulling away. "Dr. Rivera and Mr. Hong are holding them off, but it won't last long." As they crept through the back hallways of Happy Hearts, Lily could hear raised voices from the main office. Mrs. Chen's usually soft voice had transformed into a stern barrier of administrative requirements, demanding paperwork and credentials from the mysterious visitors. Who are those people? Lily whispered as they passed beneath a window. Why are they looking for us? Kai guided her toward a door she'd never noticed before, partially hidden behind old storage boxes. They're called the Initiative, he explained in hushed tones. They're interested in people like us, people who can do special things. Before Lily could ask what he meant, they heard footsteps approaching rapidly. Kai pulled her into an alcove, pressing a finger to his lips. Two men in dark suits rushed past, speaking urgently into their earpieces. The boy is here, one of them said. Lock down all exits. Once they passed, Kai led Lily through the hidden door, which opened into a narrow maintenance corridor. The walls were lined with pipes and electrical conduits, humming softly in the dim light. Remember how Mom and Dad always told us we were special? Kai asked as they hurried along. How they said we had to keep certain things secret. Lily nodded, thinking back to all the strange occurrences in their childhood, toys that moved on their own, lights that flickered when they were upset, and the way they always seemed to know what the other was thinking. They weren't just being nice parents, Kai continued. We really are special. That's why Mom and Dad had to hide us separately. The Initiative was getting too close. They reached another door, this one leading to the orphanage's old garden. Through the window, Lily could see Dr. Rivera's car idling behind the building, its engine running. But why didn't they tell us? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Why did they leave us? Kai's expression softened as he knelt down to her level. They did it to protect us. The Initiative, they collect children like us. They say it's for research, for the greater good, but... He shuddered slightly. Some kids who go with them never come back. A loud crash echoed from inside the building, followed by shouts. Kai grabbed Lily's hand, and they dashed toward Dr. Rivera's car. As they ran, Lily felt something she'd never experienced before, a surge of energy that made the air around them vibrate. It's happening again, Kai muttered, looking worried. Lily, remember how Mom taught us to control our breathing when we got scared? Do that now. As they reached the car, Dr. Rivera jumped out to help them in. Quickly, she urged, her professional demeanor replaced by urgent concern. They've called for backup. Just as they were about to climb in, one of the men in suits emerged from around the corner. Stop right there, he commanded, reaching into his jacket. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lily felt that strange energy surge again, stronger this time. Mr. Buttons, still clutched in her arms, began to glow with a soft blue light. The man in the suit froze mid-step, his eyes widening in surprise. Lily, Kai said softly, you've gotten stronger. Around them, leaves and small stones began to float in the air, suspended by an invisible force. The man tried to move forward but seemed unable to, as if held back by an invisible barrier. Dr. Rivera stared in amazement. I've never seen anything like this, she whispered. Even your parents couldn't. More shouts came from the building. The floating objects dropped as Lily's concentration broke, and they quickly piled into the car. As Dr. Rivera sped away, Lily looked back to see Mrs. Chen standing at the orphanage door, smiling and waving. Somehow, Lily knew this wasn't goodbye, Mrs. Chen had been part of the plan all along. In the car, Kai pulled out a tablet and showed it to Lily. On the screen was a map with two blinking dots moving away from the orphanage. Mom and Dad are tracking us, he explained. They've been watching all along, making sure both of us were safe until we could be reunited. But where are they? Lily asked, her head spinning with everything that had happened. They're at the safe house, Dr. Rivera answered, navigating through back streets to avoid the main roads. We'll be there soon. Your parents, they're part of a network of people who protect children like you. They had to separate you because together, your abilities are too strong to hide. As if to prove her point, the flip phone in Lily's hand began to glow with the same blue light as Mr. Buttons. A message appeared on its screen: "We love you both so much." Almost there. Mom and Dad. Kai squeezed his sister's hand. There's so much more you need to know, but we have to be careful. The initiative has eyes everywhere, and what you just did back there, they'll be more determined than ever to find us now. Looking out the window at the passing landscape, Lily realized that her life would never be the same. The quiet days at Happy Hearts seemed like a distant dream now. Yet somehow, she felt more at home than she had in months. She had her brother back, she was going to see her parents, and finally, the strange things she could do didn't feel like something to hide. As the car wound its way through increasingly remote roads, Lily noticed something odd about Mr. Buttons. The worn teddy bear's eyes seemed to shimmer with the same blue light she'd created earlier. When she squeezed him, she felt a small hard object inside, different from the note she'd found before. "Kai," she whispered, "I think Mr. Buttons has another secret." Her brother smiled knowingly. "Mom and Dad left us both clues. Mine was in my old baseball. But yours might be the most important one of all." Dr. Rivera's car wound through dense forest roads as the sun began to set. Lily sat in the back seat with Kai, carefully examining Mr. Buttons. The teddy bear felt different now, as if it had awakened along with her newfound abilities. Its worn fur still glowed faintly blue in the growing darkness. "How do we open it without breaking him?" Lily whispered to Kai, not wanting to damage her only constant companion from the past few months. Kai reached over and gently touched the bear's chest. "Do you remember the lullaby Mom used to sing to us? The one about the moonlight and the dancing stars?" Lily nodded, the melody instantly coming back to her. As she hummed the first few notes, Mr. Buttons' blue glow intensified. A small seam appeared along his back, one that hadn't been there before, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small crystal pendant, clear as glass but with swirling colors that seemed to move on their own. As soon as Lily touched it, images flooded her mind: her mother in a laboratory, her father at a computer surrounded by screens filled with strange symbols, and dozens of children with glowing hands and floating objects around them. "That's a memory crystal," Dr. Rivera explained, watching through the rearview mirror. "Your mother created it using her own abilities. She's what we call a memory weaver. She can capture memories and experiences in physical objects." "And what can I do?" Lily asked, still mesmerized by the swirling colors in the crystal. Kai smiled proudly. "You're a force wielder, like me. But you're different, stronger. Most of us can only move things or create barriers. But you, little sister, you can do something we've never seen before. You can bring objects to life, give them energy." As if to prove his point, Mr. Buttons suddenly twitched in Lily's lap, his button eyes blinking slowly. She gasped, but wasn't afraid. Somehow, it felt natural, right? "The initiative has been searching for someone with your particular abilities for years," Dr. Rivera continued. "They believe they can use it to power something they call the Consciousness Transfer Protocol. That's why your parents had to hide you separately. They knew if the initiative found both of you together, they'd stop at nothing to capture you." The car turned onto an even narrower road, barely visible in the growing darkness. Through the trees, Lily caught glimpses of small lights, like fireflies but more deliberate in their movement. As they got closer, she realized they were actually tiny drones, patrolling the perimeter of what appeared to be an ordinary camping ground. "Home sweet home," Dr. Rivera announced, pulling up to a barrier that looked like a fallen tree but smoothly lifted as they approached. "Welcome to Haven's Edge." The camping ground transformed before their eyes as they passed through some kind of invisible field. Instead of regular camping trailers, Lily saw high-tech facilities cleverly disguised as ordinary outdoor structures. Children of various ages moved between the buildings, some practicing with abilities similar to what she and Kai could do. "This is where Mom and Dad have been?" Lily asked, pressing her face against the window in amazement. They help run this place, Kai explained. They've been protecting other families like ours, helping kids understand and control their abilities. But they never stopped watching over us. Every time the initiative got close to finding either of us, they'd make sure we were moved somewhere safe. As they parked near what looked like a large log cabin, Lily noticed something odd about the crystal in her hand. The swirling colors had aligned into a pattern, pointing toward one of the buildings like a compass. "It's a guidance crystal too," came a familiar voice from behind them. "I knew you'd figure it out, sweetheart." Lily's heart stopped. Standing there, looking exactly as she remembered except for a few more gray hairs, was their mother. Behind her stood their father, his kind eyes filled with tears. The family reunion was interrupted by sudden alarms. Red lights began flashing across the compound, and the patrolling drones zoomed back toward the perimeter. "They followed us," Dr. Rivera said urgently, checking her tablet. The initiative found a way to track the energy signature from Lily's display at the orphanage. "Quick, inside," their father commanded, ushering them toward the log cabin. "The bunker is ready." As they hurried inside, Lily clutched both Mr. Buttons and the crystal. The teddy bear was fully animated now, its head turning to watch their surroundings. Through the windows, she could see other families rushing to similar shelters, parents guiding children with glowing hands and floating objects. In the cabin's main room, their mother placed her hand on an ordinary-looking wall. It slid away to reveal a high-tech command center. Screens showed the surrounding forest from various angles, and Lily could see black vehicles approaching in the distance. "Remember what I told you about Mom being a memory weaver?" Kai asked as they descended into the bunker. "Well, Dad is a shield maker. Together with your abilities and mine, we might be the only ones who can stop what's coming." Their father typed rapidly at a console while their mother prepared what looked like scientific equipment. "The initiative thinks they can use children's abilities to transfer human consciousness into machines," she explained quickly. "They don't understand that these gifts aren't meant to be used that way. They're meant to protect, to create, to bring light into the world." The crystal in Lily's hand pulsed brighter, and Mr. Buttons stood up on his own, walking toward the center of the room. Through him, she could feel something building, a power that seemed to connect everyone in the room. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it, "I think I know what we need to do." The walls shook with the sound of approaching helicopters, but Lily wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since her parents had left her at Happy Hearts, she felt complete. She had her family, she understood her gifts, and she knew that together, they could face whatever came next. Her mother smiled knowingly. "Show us, sweetheart. Show us what you can really do." The bunker hummed with energy as Lily stepped forward, still holding the glowing crystal. Mr. Buttons stood beside her, more alive than ever, his button eyes reflecting the same determination she felt inside. Through the monitors, they could see initiative forces surrounding Haven's Edge, their vehicles forming a tight circle around the compound. "The crystal shows memories," Lily said, her voice clear and confident. "But I think it can do more than that. Mom, remember how you used to tell us that understanding comes before power?" Her mother's eyes widened with recognition. "The consciousness transfer protocol, they've been approaching it all wrong. It was never about controlling power. It's about sharing understanding," Lily finished. She held out her hand to Kai, who took it without hesitation. The air around them began to shimmer with that now familiar blue energy. Their father worked quickly at the console, bringing up schematics of the compound's defense systems. "Whatever you're planning, sweetheart, we need to do it fast. Their energy-dampening fields will be active in less than 5 minutes." Dr. Rivera monitored another screen showing thermal images of the approaching forces. "They're deploying their special units, the ones with stolen abilities," she reported grimly. Lily squeezed her brother's hand tighter. "Kai, remember how we used to play that game? The one where we try to guess what the other was thinking?" He nodded, a smile spreading across his face. We never were really guessing, were we? Their mother stepped forward, placing one hand on Lily's shoulder and the other on the crystal. Immediately, the swirling colors inside it became more vibrant, more alive. I can help you share the memories, she said softly. Show them what they need to understand. Their father joined them, completing the circle. Where his hands touched, a shimmering shield of energy formed, protecting them as they worked. And I'll make sure nothing interrupts what you need to do. Through the crystal, Lily could feel the memories flowing, not just her mother's stored memories, but all of theirs. The joy of family game nights, the pain of separation, the fear of being discovered, but most importantly, the love that had kept them connected even when apart. Mr. Buttons began to pulse with the same rhythm as the crystal, his small form now radiating waves of blue light that spread throughout the bunker. Above ground, the initiative forces had breached the outer perimeter. Their heavy boots thundered across the compound as families huddled in their shelters. But instead of fear, Lily felt something else spreading through Haven's edge: connection. Through the crystal and her unique ability to give energy to objects, she was creating a network. Every stuffed animal, every treasured toy, every comfort object belonging to the children in the compound began to glow with the same blue light as Mr. Buttons. And through these objects, memories began to flow. They're slowing down, Dr. Rivera reported, watching the thermal feeds. Something's happening to their forces. On the screens, they could see the initiative soldiers stopping in their tracks. The stolen abilities they wielded began to flicker and fade as the wave of shared memories reached them. Through their tactical gear and weapons, they were receiving glimpses of the lives they were trying to disrupt, the pure joy of a child discovering their gifts, the warm embrace of accepting parents, the strength found in protecting rather than exploiting these abilities. The crystal pulsed brighter, and Lily felt her own unique power joining with her family's gifts. Her mother's ability to weave memories, her father's protective shields, and Kai's force wielding, all flowing together through the network she'd created. Look! Kai pointed to one of the monitors. The children in the other bunkers were emerging, each holding their own glowing possessions. The blue light had spread throughout the compound, creating a dome of shared consciousness that was far more powerful than any force the initiative had tried to create. Through their connected minds, Lily could feel the confusion and then understanding dawning on their attackers. The initiative soldiers began to lower their weapons, some removing their tactical gear as the weight of the shared experiences moved them. This is what they never understood, their mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. These gifts aren't weapons to be used or powers to be controlled. They're bridges between hearts and minds. The crystal in Lily's hand grew warm, and through it, she began to project not just memories, but understanding. She showed the initiative forces why their consciousness transfer protocol could never work, because consciousness wasn't something to be transferred or controlled, but something to be shared and understood. Mr. Buttons, now floating at the center of their circle, became a beacon broadcasting this truth to everyone within reach. The other children's toys joined in, each adding their own unique frequency to the harmony of shared consciousness. The perimeter teams are standing down, Dr. Rivera announced, her voice filled with awe. They're taking off their gear. Some of them are crying. Through the network of shared consciousness, Lily could feel the change happening. The initiative soldiers weren't just stopping their attack, they were experiencing an awakening. They were feeling the joy, love, and purpose that came from using these gifts as they were meant to be used, to connect, to protect, to understand. Mom, Dad, Lily said, her voice tired but happy, I think this is why you had to keep us apart until we were ready. Together, we're not just strong, we're complete. As the blue light began to fade, the screens showed initiative forces retreating, but not in fear or defeat. They were leaving with something far more valuable than the power they'd hoped to control, they were leaving with understanding. In the bunker, Lily sat down, suddenly exhausted. Mr. Buttons, no longer glowing but still somehow more alive than before, waddled over and snuggled into her lap. The crystal had grown quiet, but she could feel that it had changed, become something more than just a container for memories. "You did it, sweetheart," her father said, kneeling beside her. "You found a way to protect everyone without hurting anyone." Her mother brushed Lily's hair back from her face. "You showed us all what these gifts are really for." Kai sat next to her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "So, little sister, ready to help teach the other kids how to do that?" Lily looked around at her family, the family she'd waited so long to be reunited with, and smiled. "First, can we have breakfast together? Like we used to?" Their laughter filled the bunker as the morning sun began to peek through the compound's windows above, shining down on a world that was just a little bit more connected. A little bit more understood than it had been before. The following days at Haven's Edge felt like a dream to Lily. After years of separation and months of loneliness at Happy Heart's orphanage, she was finally living the life she'd always imagined, surrounded by her family and others who understood her gifts. The morning after the confrontation with the initiative, she woke up in a real bedroom, decorated with twinkling lights that responded to her emotions, floating and dancing when she was happy. Mr. Button sat on a special cushion by her bed, still occasionally twitching or adjusting his bow tie, though he no longer needed to glow with blue energy. The crystal hung on a delicate chain around her neck, its colors swirling gently, now serving as a reminder of the connection she'd helped create. "Breakfast is ready," her mother called from downstairs. The words felt magical, so ordinary, yet so precious after all this time apart. In the kitchen of their family's cabin, the scene could have been from any normal household, her father attempting to flip pancakes, and occasionally catching them with a subtle use of his shield powers when they went astray, her mother weaving small memory lights into the air to entertain them, and Kai practicing his force-wielding to pass the syrup without touching it. "Mrs. Chen called this morning," their mother said as she set down a plate of fresh fruit. "She sends her love and says the orphanage is much quieter without you. Can we visit her?" Lily asked, catching a strawberry that had started to float due to her excitement. Her father smiled. "Soon. Things are changing out there, thanks to what you did. The initiative's leadership has been completely restructured. Many of their former agents have actually reached out to help protect gifted children instead of trying to exploit them." Speaking of changes, Kai added, "You should see what's happening at the training grounds." After breakfast, they walked through Haven's Edge together as a family. The compound looked different in the daylight, less like a secret facility and more like a wonderful summer camp. Children played freely, their gifts on display without fear. Some rode bikes that hovered slightly above the ground, while others practiced creating beautiful light patterns in the air. At the training grounds, Lily saw something that made her stop in her tracks. Several former initiative agents, now dressed in casual clothes, were working with the children. But instead of trying to harness or control their abilities, they were sharing stories and learning from each other. "Remember how your connection helped them understand?" her mother explained. "Some of them had their own gifts that the initiative had taught them to use wrongly. Now they're learning the right way, through understanding and sharing rather than control." One of the agents, a young woman with kind eyes, was showing a small group of children how to create protective bubbles similar to her father's shields. "The power isn't in how strong you can make it," she was saying, "but in what you choose to protect." Lily watched as Mr. Buttons, who had insisted on coming along, he did that now, made his preferences known in small, endearing ways, waddled over to the group. The children delighted in his animated presence, and soon their own stuffed animals and toys began to show small signs of life. "You've started a whole new way of using gifts," Kai said proudly. "No one knew objects could be brought to life safely until you showed us how." Dr. Rivera, who had become a regular visitor to their cabin, approached with a tablet in her hand. "The network you created that night, we're calling it the Understanding Web, it's still active, just more subtle now. Children all over the world who have gifts are finding their way to safe havens like this one. They're drawn to the connection you helped establish. As if to demonstrate, a car pulled up to the compound's entrance. A family emerged, parents with worried faces and a small boy clutching a worn robot toy. The moment they passed through the perimeter, the boy's toy began to twitch with familiar blue energy, and his face lit up with understanding. "That's how I felt," Lily said softly, "when I first realized I wasn't alone." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You never were alone, sweetheart. But we understand now that separating you and Kai, even to protect you, might not have been the best solution. Sometimes the strongest protection comes from being together, from understanding each other." They spent the afternoon watching new families arrive, each drawn by the lingering effects of the understanding web. Every child's story was different, but they all shared the same look of wonder when they realized they were finally somewhere they could be themselves. Lily worked with some of the younger children, showing them how to share their experiences through their favorite toys and treasured objects. She discovered that each child had their own unique way of connecting, some through light, others through movement, and some through small transformations that made their precious possessions uniquely alive. "You know what the best part is?" Kai asked as they sat together on their cabin's porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "We never have to pretend to be normal again." Their mother joined them, carrying hot chocolate topped with marshmallows that glowed softly with remembered joy. "Normal is whatever you are, sweetheart. Your gifts, all of our gifts, they're just part of what makes us who we are." Mr. Buttons, sitting contentedly in Lily's lap, nodded his little head in agreement, something that no longer surprised any of them. "But what about the other initiative people?" Lily asked. "The ones who didn't understand?" Her father, who had been reviewing security feeds on his tablet, looked up with a gentle smile. "The understanding web affected more than just the agents who were here that night. The connection you created, it spreads naturally now, touching hearts and changing minds. The few who still don't understand, well, they can't fight against understanding forever." As the stars began to appear, Lily held her crystal up to the sky. Its swirling colors seemed to dance with the starlight, and she could feel the connections it represented, threads of understanding linking family to family, gift to gift, heart to heart. "Dad," she asked, "do you think we'll ever have to hide again?" He pulled her close in a warm hug. "No, sweetheart. Thanks to you, we've learned that the real power isn't in hiding our gifts or using them to control others. It's in sharing them, understanding them, and helping others do the same." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Lily felt a surge of joy so pure that all the objects around them, Mr. Buttons, the crystal, even the porch swing they sat on, began to glow softly with that now familiar blue light. But this time, no one was afraid. This time, it felt like home. A month had passed since the night that changed everything at Haven's Edge. The compound had grown, with new cabins sprouting up among the trees to accommodate the steady stream of families seeking refuge and understanding. Lily's life had fallen into a new rhythm, one filled with love, learning, and the joy of helping others discover their gifts. One crisp morning, as golden autumn leaves danced in the air, Lily sat cross-legged in the center of what they now called the Understanding Circle. Around her, a dozen children of various ages watched in wonder as she demonstrated how to share memories through their cherished objects. "Think of your happiest memory with your special toy," she explained, holding Mr. Buttons gently. "The energy isn't something you create, it's already there, in the love you've given them." A small boy named Tommy raised his hand, clutching a well-loved toy dinosaur. "But what if my memories are sad? Sometimes I remember when I had to hide my powers, and it makes me scared." Lily smiled softly, remembering her own days of loneliness at Happy Hearts. "Those memories are important too. When we share them, it helps others understand, and then the sad memories become part of something bigger, something that helps make sure no one has to hide anymore." As if to demonstrate, Mr. Buttons began to glow, sharing a gentle wave of comforting energy that made all the children's toys twitch and stir. Tommy's dinosaur let out a tiny, surprisingly gentle roar, making everyone giggle. Later that afternoon, Lily found her mother in her laboratory, where she was working with Dr. Rivera and some former initiative scientists. The room was filled with floating memory crystals, each one containing stories and experiences from different families. "Mom," Lily asked, watching the crystals dance in the air, "remember when you used to say that understanding comes before power? I think I finally know what that means." Her mother looked up from her work, her eyes twinkling. "Tell me what you've learned, sweetheart." The initiative thought power was about making things happen, moving objects, creating shields, transferring consciousness. But real power is about helping others feel less alone. Lily held up her crystal necklace, which had become a template for helping other families create their own memory storage devices. When we understand each other, we don't need to fight or hide anymore. Dr. Rivera smiled, making notes on her tablet. The understanding web has spread further than we ever imagined possible. Last week, a gifted child in a small village halfway around the world started making her family's garden toys dance. Instead of being afraid, her entire community celebrated. They'd already been touched by the understanding you helped create. Through the laboratory window, Lily could see Kai working with a group of teenagers, teaching them how to combine their force-wielding abilities to create beautiful aerial displays. Their father stood nearby, his protective shields turned into prismatic surfaces that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. "Lily," called a familiar voice. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, having arrived for her weekly visit. She had become an important part of Haven's Edge, helping new families transition and providing the kind of warm comfort she'd once given Lily at the orphanage. "The new families are here," Mrs. Chen announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "And you won't believe who's with them." Lily followed Mrs. Chen to the compound's entrance, Mr. Buttons trotting along beside them. What she saw there made her stop in her tracks. Among the new arrivals was the stern-faced man who had tried to stop them outside the orphanage that day. But his face wasn't stern anymore, it was filled with a kind of wondering guilt. "I've been looking for you," he said softly, kneeling down to Lily's level. "Not to capture you this time, but to thank you. What you showed us that night, it helped me find my own daughter." He gestured to a young girl standing shyly behind him, holding a blanket that shimmered with faint traces of blue energy. "I gave her up years ago, when her gifts first appeared. I thought I was protecting her, but I was just afraid." Lily felt the crystal at her neck pulse warmly. Without hesitation, she walked over to the girl and held out her hand. "I'm Lily. Would you like to meet Mr. Buttons?" As the two girls began to talk, more former initiative agents arrived with their own families. The understanding web had done more than just change minds. It had healed hearts and reunited families torn apart by fear and misunderstanding. That evening, Haven's Edge hosted a celebration. The training grounds were transformed into a festival space, with floating lights created by the children's combined abilities. Toys of all kinds danced and played, brought to life by the joyful energy that now flowed freely through the compound. Standing with her family, watching the celebration, Lily felt a completeness she had never known before. Her father's shields created a dome of shimmering protection over the gathering, not because they needed protection anymore, but because it was beautiful. Her mother's memory crystals floated among the crowd, sharing stories and experiences that made strangers into friends. "You know," Kai said, putting an arm around his sister's shoulders, "when Mom and Dad first told me we had to separate, I thought our family would never be whole again. But look at what you did, you didn't just put our family back together, you helped create a whole new kind of family." Mr. Buttons, sitting at Lily's feet, nodded sagely. The little bear had become something of a symbol at Haven's Edge, a reminder that love and understanding could bring magic to even the most ordinary things. As the stars began to appear above the celebration, Dr. Rivera approached with news that made Lily's heart soar. "The last initiative facility has been transformed," she announced. "They're turning it into another haven, like this one." The understanding web, it's not just a connection anymore. It's becoming a way of life. Lily looked around at her expanded family, her parents, Kai, Mrs. Chen, the former agents who had become teachers, and all the children who no longer had to hide who they were. The crystal at her neck pulsed one final time, sharing a wave of pure joy that made every toy, every treasured object, and every memory crystal in Haven's Edge glow with that beautiful blue light. "Mom," she said, watching the lights dance, "I think I'm ready to help build the next Haven." Her mother hugged her close. "You already are, sweetheart. Every time you help someone understand, you're building something beautiful." And in that moment, under the stars and surrounded by the family she'd never truly lost, Lily understood the greatest truth of all, that sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of something far more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. 1 year had passed since Lily first arrived at Haven's Edge. The small compound had blossomed into a thriving community, with similar havens sprouting up across the world, all connected by the gentle pulse of the understanding web. On this particular morning, Lily stood in front of Happy Hearts Orphanage, holding Mr. Buttons and feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Ready?" Kai asked, standing beside her. They had come full circle, but this time they weren't running or hiding. The orphanage looked exactly as she remembered it, but somehow smaller, more ordinary. Children played in the yard, some of them clearly gifted, their toys showing faint traces of blue energy as they played. Mrs. Chen had transformed Happy Hearts into a waypoint for gifted children, a safe place where they could stay until their families were ready to understand and accept them. "I think so," Lily replied, clutching her crystal necklace. Over the past year, she had learned to control her abilities with remarkable precision. Mr. Buttons no longer needed to glow continuously, he simply was alive, a constant friend who chose when to show his animation. Inside, Mrs. Chen was counseling a family, parents who had just discovered their child's gifts and were scared of what it meant. Lily and Kai waited patiently in the familiar hallway where they had once made their escape. "Remember when we hid in that supply closet?" Kai whispered, making them both giggle. When Mrs. Chen finished with the family, she welcomed Lily and Kai with warm hugs. "Perfect timing," she said. "We have someone special who needs to meet you." In the playroom, a small boy sat alone in the corner, his eyes fixed on a toy car that refused to stay still, occasionally rolling on its own despite his attempts to keep it motionless. His parents had left him there 2 days ago, promising to return once they had figured things out. "His name is Danny," Mrs. Chen explained softly. "His story, it's a lot like yours was." Lily approached Danny slowly, Mr. Buttons walking beside her of his own accord. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the animated teddy bear, a mix of fear and wonder crossing his face. "Hi Danny," Lily said, sitting down next to him. "Your car seems to have a mind of its own." Danny nodded hesitantly. Are you like me?" Instead of answering, Lily held out her crystal. "Would you like to see something amazing?" Through the crystal, she shared memories, not just her own, but the collected experiences of countless gifted children who had found their way home. She showed him Haven's Edge, the celebration nights where toys danced under the stars, the classes where children learned to use their gifts for creation rather than control. As the memories flowed, Danny's toy car began to glow with that familiar blue light. But this time, instead of rolling away frightened, it drove happy little circles around them, making Danny laugh for the first time since arriving at Happy Hearts. "Your parents are scared right now," Lily explained gently, "but not because of you. They're scared because they don't understand yet. But they will." Right on cue, there was a commotion at the orphanage entrance. Danny's parents had returned, much sooner than anyone expected. Through the understanding web, they had been drawn back, their fear transformed into a desperate need to understand. "We felt something," Danny's mother explained tearfully as she rushed to hug him. Last night, all of Danny's toys at home started to glow. We remembered seeing something on the news about special gifts, about a place called Haven's Edge. The understanding web, Kai explained. It helps people remember what's really important. That afternoon, Lily and Kai helped Mrs. Chen explain everything to Danny's family. They watched as understanding replaced fear in his parents' eyes, as love overcame uncertainty. It was a scene that had played out countless times over the past year, but it never lost its magic. Before they left, Lily had one more task to complete. In the supply closet where she had once hidden, she and Mr. Buttons placed a special crystal, a beacon for any other gifted children who might find their way to Happy Hearts. "It's strange," she told Kai as they walked out. "A year ago, I thought being left here was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now it's part of something bigger," he finished, understanding perfectly. Back at Haven's Edge that evening, their parents had organized a special celebration. It was exactly 1 year since the night of the confrontation with the initiative, now known as the Night of Understanding. Families from all over had gathered to celebrate not just their gifts, but the connections they had formed. The former initiative agents who had become their greatest allies put on a spectacular display, using their once feared abilities to create beauty instead of control. Dr. Rivera presented her latest research, showing how the understanding web had fundamentally changed the way gifted children developed their abilities, no longer in fear and isolation, but in joy and community. As Lily watched the celebration, sitting between her parents with Kai nearby, she felt Mr. Buttons stir in her lap. The little bear had been her constant companion through it all, from the loneliest nights at Happy Hearts to this moment of complete belonging. "You know what's amazing?" she said to her family. "A year ago, I thought I was alone. I thought you had abandoned me. But you were protecting me until I was strong enough to protect others." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You were always strong, sweetheart. You just needed to understand your strength." "And now," her father added, creating a small shield that caught the evening light, "you've helped create a world where no one has to hide their strength anymore." The crystal around Lily's neck pulsed one last time, sharing not memories now, but possibilities, visions of a future where gifts were celebrated, where understanding replaced fear, and where no child would ever feel abandoned because of who they were. As the stars appeared above Haven's Edge, Lily looked around at her expanded family, not just her parents and Kai, but every person whose life had been touched by the understanding web. Mr. Button sat contentedly in her lap, no longer needing to glow with blue energy to prove he was special. Like Lily herself, he simply was who he was meant to be. "Ready for what comes next?" Kai asked, knowing his sister had been invited to help establish new havens around the world. Lily smiled, feeling the pulse of understanding that connected them all. "Ready," she said. "After all, every ending is just the beginning of a new story." And in that moment, under the stars of Haven's Edge, surrounded by love and understanding, Lily knew that she had found something far more precious than the family she thought she'd lost. She had found a way to help make sure no one would ever have to feel truly abandoned again.